Hello everybody, it's Silver. This is Sworn. Sworn is a roguelite that is going very specifically for the Hades style of things. And you'll see that pretty much in a lot of its design language and stuff that it's clearly inspired heavily by that. But it's also got plenty of its own ideas. So the first thing that makes it a little bit different is its setting, because what we've got here is a sort of dark Arthurian setting. And I'll admit, even though it's not the most original thing ever, I'm a big fan of taking Arthurian myth and sort of twisting it and making it a little bit darker. It was already pretty dark to begin with, some of the original stuff, but I'm a fan of taking the sort of familiar Arthurian setting and making it into like a dark fantasy version. I think there's a lot of potential mileage in that, especially when you consider, making the Grail Knights themselves, the Knights of the Round Table, into like twisted mockeries of who they were, and then you include some of like the Fae stuff and all that, and it just gets kind of more complicated from there. And that's exactly what this game has done. So the first thing to talk about is how it looks. Now this is obviously going to be a bit of a difficult thing when you're inspired by a game that's as absolutely gorgeous as Hades. You got to also have a very striking art style to show your inspirations. But they've actually managed to do that, although it's a very different art style than Hades, which is like a sort of hand-painted style. But in Sworn's case, we're looking at a really interesting combination of like sort of hand-drawn and early 3D rendering stuff. The overall art style reminds me a lot of what people think the PS1 looked like when they haven't actually played a PS1 in a really long time. Like the sort of nostalgia-goggled version in their mind of what the PS1 could do. It kind of reminds me of that. The way that the textures and stuff look on the environment and on the models, like the various Fae and your characters and stuff, they all have kind of like a low-res texture look to them. And it looks very much like sort of late PS1, early PS2, but obviously a lot more complicated and a lot more technically impressive than what either of those consoles could actually do at the time. I think that's actually a pretty unique art style, basically being like an imperfect recollection of old consoles. That's kind of what it reminds me of. I'm not sure if that was their exact modus operandi, if that's like exactly what they wanted to do, but it definitely reminds me a lot of that. And a lot of times when people say that a game looks like a PS2 game or looks like a PS1 game, they're kind of talking about something that's very different from how those games actually looked, and this reminds me of that. It's also got a very good use of color, something I like to comment on a lot in games when I see it because I think it's worth talking about. But in this case, the game uses color to denote the various Fae powers. So Titania's powers are always orange, Oberon's are blue, and so on. And this means that whenever you see a bright color of sort of magic pop in the environment, it's related to one of the Fae. And I think that goes together with these sort of low-res textures and like kind of mid-century 3D that kind of all comes together to make this pretty unique art style that looks really good in my opinion. And in motion during gameplay, most importantly, it's very clear but still manages to look really good. When you see lots and lots of color on screen and stuff, it's not like confusing color vomit where you lose track of your character and don't know what's happening. The game is readable enough to where even in a hectic boss fight or something, you never lose track of yourself, but it still manages to have very pretty popping arcane colors everywhere, which I like. As far as sound goes, I think it does its job pretty well. I haven't encountered anything about like the battle sounds or anything that really pop out as like ultra satisfying, but they do their job and they sound fine, so I think that there's also nothing wrong with the soundscape. For a sort of action RPG battle soundscape, it's totally fine and it does its job. However, the music is a different matter because the music definitely stands out. It's an interesting mixture in terms of, you'll hear like lutes and stuff, but you'll also hear kind of metal in the same breath as some of the more traditional instruments and things. And it combines to make a soundtrack that's really quite memorable and very good. Also, the music does this really cool thing where whenever you're exploring or doing something outside of combat, it only plays part of the instruments of a song. And then when enemies come in, it plays the rest of the song. So all of the instruments of a track are only present during the combat parts of using that track. The rest of it sort of chills out and becomes a more calm background version of itself, which I love it when games have dynamic music like that. I think it's always really cool, and it almost always impresses me just because it's neat, and this is one of those cases. It sounds really good. The sort of chill versions of the tracks have a nice background exploration-y feel to them. They have kind of a nice chill vibe, and then it all sort of kicks off when combat happens, and it gets a lot more upbeat and loud and stuff, and it's a very effective soundtrack, I think. Game mechanics wise, you've got a lot of stuff happening, some of which will be very familiar to you if you've played a game like Hades, some of which are a little bit different. So the main thing that is like Hades, the thing that's most similar, are the Fey blessings. Just like how in Hades you can go from chamber to chamber and get some blessings of the various Greek gods, in this game you go from chamber to chamber and get the blessings of various Fey creatures from myth and also from like Shakespeare's writings and stuff. And when you come upon a blessing, usually it'll be a choice between two different Fey, and you can choose whichever one that you want, and then once you choose the one of the two, then it will give you a list of 3 possible blessings, and you can choose one of those. And there are various different blessing slots, and you can have 1 blessing in each slot, and they won't get overwritten, so when you find more blessings, you'll find them in the slots that you don't have. You won't find them in slots you already do have. So you have categories like light attack blessings, strong attack blessings, spell blessings, and several other things, including ultimates and summons, to make for an overall pretty large amount of build variety in the game. There are quite a few different Fey to choose from, and some of them are a lot more rare than others, but you'll also find that blessings have a rarity attached to them. Higher rarity blessings are simply stronger versions of lower rarity ones, but there are also some blessings that only appear at higher rarities and don't have a lower rarity version at all. And your main job during a run is to choose a good complementary number of these blessings to create a build on the fly and then make it as far as you can. One big difference from Hades is how the character and weapon system works. So you actually have 4 different characters that you can play. Each character has 4 different weapons and 4 different spells. So this means there's a lot of variety in terms of what you can actually play as, which is really cool, since each weapon has its own sort of mechanics and its own feel, and each spell is also useful in its own ways. This means that it's really cool that every one of the 4 characters has a completely new, non-overlapping 4 weapons and 4 spells. They don't share any at all. They're all unique. Most weapons have a light attack and a heavy attack, although some of them also have a couple of extra things like a dash attack or a charge attack. It depends on the weapon. And then your spell is really all kinds of different things. The characters all have a lot of variety in terms of spells. You may be able to summon black holes or fire constant beams or summon shields or all sorts of things. There's a lot of different spells, and they tend to be very powerful and very useful, but they're on sort of a cooldown, as it were. You have this blue gauge in the bottom left of the screen that fills up whenever you use a spell, and these represent spell charges. You start with only one of them, but as you go through the game and upgrade yourself, you can have more than one spell charge at a time. So in Run, you'll have your weapon, your spell, and all your blessings that will all work together to create a sort of play style that'll be for that run. And it's nice how many different weapons and spells there are combined with all the numbers of blessings and stuff, because this is your build variety. This is where it all comes from. So the fact that there's this much of it means that there is actually a really solid base for it, even as the game stands already. There's a lot here, even though the game is still in early access. I was actually really impressed by the fact that every single character has their own unique 4 weapons and spells. I wasn't expecting that. I kind of expected them to be 4 weapons for everyone, not 4 weapons for each person, and that's pretty cool, and is an appreciated bit of extra variety. And the fact that they're all currently available in the early access means that they've focused heavily on getting out the early access with a lot of variety as a key part of what they want to do. Right, like it's clear that they wanted to offer lots of variety from the beginning. But as you go through the chambers, Fey blessings are not the only things that you'll be able to find. You'll also find lots of other possible rewards that you can choose from. Oftentimes at the end of any given chamber, you'll have 2 doors, and they will show you what the rewards will be in that chamber, and you can choose whichever one you want. Although sometimes one of the doors will be broken, and you only have one option, but usually you've got 2. Some of the other things you can encounter include gold chambers that give you lots of gold that you can spend at shop chambers that also exist. There's also other kinds of rewards that you can bring back to the hub once you're done for progression purposes, like these crystal shards for making yourself stronger, as well as moonstones for unlocking new mechanics. The grail water for upgrading any of the weapons that you want to upgrade. Every weapon has its own little mini upgrade tree, which is pretty cool. And also embers, which you can use to unlock new characters and weapons and spells and stuff. One of the rewards that I actually really like is the Sword in the Stone upgrade. Occasionally you'll find one of these. They're more rare than blessings and stuff, but when you do find one, they give you an upgrade to either your weapon or your spell. And every weapon and spell has their own possible upgrades that are unique to that one thing. So they don't share really any of their capabilities. This means that you can diversify what you're capable of by getting these upgrades. They may improve your charge attack in some way based on how many characters it hits at once, how many enemies that are in its radius. It may upgrade your spell in a way that makes it cast in multiple projectiles instead of just one, so it's like a spread shot spell or something like that. There are all kinds of different upgrades, and these Sword in the Stone upgrade rooms are always worth going to when you find one, because these tend to be really significant power increases to your character. After a certain number of chambers, you'll find a boss chamber, a legendary beast, which is sort of like a mini-boss, kind of. It's a full-on boss, but it's not as difficult as a Grail Knight. And one of these legendary beasts will be in the way halfway through any given run. And then once you beat that beast, you will go on to several more chambers, and then eventually an actual full-on Knight of the Round Table. And the Grail Knight is the sort of final boss for that particular biome. Once you're able to beat them, if you're able to beat them, you'll get a bit of a rest at a fountain that restores some of your health, although it's really not very much. And then you will go on to the next biome, which will have its own tile set, its own enemies, its own bosses and things, and repeat the process until you finally get to the end and find Arthur. In terms of progression, once you're back at the hub after you inevitably die, you will have several different things you can do. I mentioned stuff like moonstones that allow you to unlock new entire mechanics, like special secret shops or little side events that can happen and some other things like that. There are quite a few of them, and they all increase the overall complexity and difficulty of a run, but they give you a lot more reward types and stuff too. And then there are the crystal shards. This is your main method of progression. So whenever you end a run and go back to the hub, there's this big crystal in the middle that revives you. And you can poke that crystal and you will get this sort of skill tree looking thing that you can spend these shards on purchasing the nodes of. And usually each one has a couple of different pathways that make a sort of constellation looking picturesque thing that you can eventually light up by purchasing all the nodes and getting various upgrades. At first, you'll only have the life or health related upgrade path, but the first time you defeat each of the mini bosses, the sort of halfway point bosses, you'll get a stone that unlocks another one of those constellation looking things, and they have their own complete new skill tree, their own line of purchasable skills, and you can use your shards on any of them that you currently have unlocked. So you'll basically diversify over time as you go through the game a larger variety of different possible upgrades. Whenever you complete a run, whether you die or not, you will unlock different things for the character class that you are currently playing, and it's based on the number of chambers that you cleared. And the sort of experience gauge will fill up based on the number of chambers you went through, and this is how you get new weapons and spells and stuff, because when you first unlock a character, you'll only have one weapon and one spell, but as you use them more, then you'll unlock further options that you can buy with these Ember resources that you can bring back to just get them in whatever order you want. Basically, you don't have to purchase them in the order that you unlocked them, although they do get more expensive as you go through the ones that you've unlocked. The last one you unlock will be more expensive, but still you can unlock them in whatever order you want. One idea that I really like and have never really seen much before in a game with skill trees is that the skill trees in this game, both the ones that you upgrade with shards at the big crystal and the weapon-specific ones that you upgrade with grail water, both of those will have big, important nodes in the middle of a whole bunch of smaller nodes. And those big nodes have a symbol in them, and you can choose to flip the symbol over, and it will change what that node does. So basically, this big, important keystone node will do a very powerful thing, but you can choose to flip it and have it do a completely different powerful thing if you want that one instead. So this actually allows you to slightly customize your skill trees by flipping over these symbols to whichever ones you think offer you the benefits that you want most. That, I think, is a really cool idea, and I would like to see that more often in games with skill trees, because it allows you to expand what the skill tree can do without physically making it larger. So you can get more different possible build variety out of a skill tree without making it take longer to complete. There is one criticism of the game that I do have. I've really enjoyed my time with it. For the most part, I think it's an absolutely fantastic roguelite, and it does a lot of things very well, but there is one thing that I'm a little bit hesitant about, and that's the pacing. The pacing seems very slow in this game, and I'm not sure if that's deliberate or not. If it's on purpose, then that's totally fine. That's what they're going for. That's okay. I'm curious if it's meant to be this slow. Basically, what I mean is your character moves incredibly slowly in this game. Your dash is on a relatively long cooldown, and it also doesn't move you very far, which means you can't actually zip around the arena with it. It just doesn't move far enough for you to do that. It only moves a short distance, and it has kind of a long cooldown. One thing, by the way, I would like to see is a notification of when the cooldown is complete. That's something that a lot of these games tend to have, like how Hades 2 has the after images that catch up to you to show when your cooldown is over and you can dash again. Something like that would be really appreciated in this game. But yeah, you move slow, you dash slow, you attack slow. Your attack animations are very long, and they also kind of lock you in place for a while, making you rooted and also quite slow feeling. So pretty much everything about this game's control scheme is slow, and I'm curious if that is purposeful or if they are maybe wanting a bit of a faster pace and just haven't gotten there yet. I'm not sure. But as it currently stands, something that I would definitely mention is that this is a slow game. This is also compounded by the fact that enemies have a lot of health in this game. Like, some enemies I think have too much health. They seem to be a little bit too healthy to be reasonable, which means that combat takes longer on average because enemies take a while to batter down. Although one positive thing I will say about this does not extend to bosses. Bosses do not have absurd amounts of health. They have pretty reasonable amounts of health, actually, and go down relatively quickly, but are highly lethal fights because they also deal tons of damage to you. So overall, despite some pacing concerns, I think Sworn is a really fantastic roguelite that is in a very difficult to replace mold of Hades, but it is actually managing to do it quite well. It is doing its own version of that thing, and it's doing it with a lot of competence, which makes it a lot of fun. I really enjoy how much of a focus on variety the game already has, and I think that's going to serve it well going forward. And I'm excited to see what else is added to the game during the early access period and what is shored up and what is polished up and stuff, because I think there's already quite a lot of polish and variety here, so I'm interested to see what else is added. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Sworn if you guys wish to check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.